Nobody saw this coming, and that's exactly why it matters. While most fans were distracted by draft rumors and quarterback debates, the Cleveland Browns quietly pulled off a move that could reshape the entire direction of this franchise. A fifth-round pick. That's all it took to land a proven starting tackle in Titus Howard, and then they doubled down with a massive 3-year, $63 million extension. This isn't just another offseason transaction, it's a statement. For years, Browns fans have watched promising seasons collapse because the offensive line couldn't hold up, quarterbacks running for their lives, drives stalling, playoff hopes fading. But this move feels different. It feels intentional, calculated, almost like the front office is finally playing the long game. And here, where it gets even more interesting, this trade might not just be about fixing the trenches. It might be about protecting the future face of the franchise. Let's break down what's really happening in Cleveland, because the ripple effects of this deal could be bigger than anyone expected. At first glance, trading a fifth-round pick for a right tackle doesn't sound like headline material. But when you dig deeper, the details tell a completely different story. Titus Howard isn't some depth piece or short-term patch. He's 29 years old in his prime and coming off back-to-back seasons where he started 16 games. In a league where offensive linemen shuffle in and out of lineups every week, that kind of durability is gold. And it's not just about showing up, it's about performance. Howard ranked among the top pass-blocking tackles in the NFL, finishing 6th in pass protection metrics according to league analytics. 6th, that's elite territory. For a Browns team that struggled to keep its quarterbacks upright, this is massive. Over the past few seasons, Cleveland's offense has been inconsistent at best. Drives would start with promise and end with pressure collapsing the pocket. Timing routes couldn't develop. Deep shots rarely had time to breathe. And when your offensive line falters, everything falls apart, no matter how talented your skill players are. Howard immediately changes that equation. But here's what really makes this move stand out: the extension. 3 years, $63 million, with $45 million in new money. That's not "let's see how this works out." That's commitment. That's the front office saying, "We believe this is a foundational piece." In today's NFL, contracts speak louder than press conferences, and this contract screams stability. Teams don't invest that kind of money unless they're certain. The salary cap is a chessboard, and one bad deal can cripple flexibility for years. Cleveland didn't just trade for Howard, they built him into their future through 2028. That signals confidence not only in his ability, but in the direction of the roster as a whole. And here's the part most people are overlooking. This wasn't some reckless gamble. The Browns used the same fifth-round pick they acquired in the Kenny Pickett trade to make this happen. In other words, they flipped a backup quarterback into a top-tier starting tackle. That's asset management at its finest, turning surplus into stability. Meanwhile, Houston clears cap space and prepares to pay their own young core. Both teams walk away satisfied, but Cleveland may have secured the more immediate impact. Because when you solidify the offensive line, you're not just adding protection. You're unlocking the entire playbook. You're giving your quarterback time to read the field. You're giving receivers time to separate. You're giving your offense a chance to finally operate the way it was designed to. And that's where things start to get even more intriguing, because this move might be less about the present and more about who Cleveland believes is the future under center. Let's stop pretending this trade exists in a vacuum. When a franchise invests heavily in pass protection, it's not random, it's strategic. And in Cleveland's case, it feels like a giant arrow pointing toward one name: Shedeur Sanders. The Browns didn't just add a tackle, they added security, and young quarterbacks need security more than anything. There's been plenty of noise surrounding Cleveland's quarterback room. Deshaun Watson is still technically in the picture, still carrying a contract that looms over the franchise. But if you read between the lines, This move doesn't feel like it's about protecting a veteran trying to reclaim old form. It feels like preparation for a new era. Shedeur Sanders represents upside. He represents youth, confidence, and a fresh start. But no quarterback, no matter how talented, can develop if he's constantly under pressure. We've seen it happen across the league. Promising young passers get drafted into unstable situations, take hit after hit, lose confidence, and never fully recover. The Browns appear determined not to let that happen. By locking in Titus Howard long-term, Cleveland is building infrastructure before handing over the keys. They're reinforcing the walls before the storm hits. That's how smart organizations operate. They don't wait for their quarterback to struggle before fixing the problem. They anticipate it. And here's something else that's interesting. This move suggests the Browns are leaning into a pass-heavy identity. Howard's strength is in pass protection. He's at his best when anchoring against edge rushers, buying time in the pocket. You don't prioritize that skill set unless you plan to throw the football a lot. That tells us something about the offensive philosophy moving forward. If Sanders becomes the full-time starter, he won't be stepping into chaos. He'll be stepping behind a line that's being rebuilt with intention. A line designed to let him read defenses, push the ball downfield, and play with confidence instead of fear. But there's also another layer to this. Moves like this create competition and clarity. They send a message inside the locker room. The future is being shaped right now. Veterans feel it. Young players feel it. When a front office makes decisive, forward-thinking investments, it changes the tone of the entire building. And what happens next could be even bigger. Because if this is step one in rebuilding the trenches, it won't stop here. Free agency, the draft, more additions are likely coming. Cleveland isn't patching holes, they're redesigning the foundation. The Browns aren't just trying to survive the AFC North anymore. They're trying to build something that lasts. And this move, it might be the clearest sign yet that the rebuild isn't theoretical, it's already in motion. Here, where this gets even more interesting. The Browns didn't just improve their offensive line. They quietly pulled off one of the smarter asset flips of the offseason. Remember that fifth-round pick they sent to Houston? That wasn't some random selection they were clinging to. It was the same pick Cleveland acquired in the Kenny Pickett trade. Let that sink in for a second. They moved off a quarterback who clearly wasn't part of their long-term plans, turned him into draft capital, and then flipped that exact pick into a proven, top-tier starting tackle under contract for 3 years. That's not luck, that's calculated roster management. Too many teams let assets rot. They hold on to players too long. They cut guys for nothing. They mismanage value. Cleveland did the opposite. They extracted value from a situation that could have easily produced zero return. And that tells you something about Andrew Berry and the front office. For years, Browns fans questioned decision-making at the top. There were controversial contracts, risky bets, moves that felt reactive instead of strategic. But this feels intentional. It feels like a front office thinking 3 steps ahead. And while Cleveland benefits, Houston's side of this trade reveals something important too. The Texans cleared cap space. They're preparing to pay their own young stars, especially C.J. Stroud. Franchise quarterbacks command massive extensions, and Houston is planning for that reality. They drafted and developed offensive line depth. They believe they can replace Howard internally. Both teams are operating with clarity. But here, why Cleveland's side feels more urgent. The Browns aren't just managing money. They're stabilizing a position that has directly impacted their ability to compete. The AFC North is brutal. You're facing elite pass rushers multiple times a year. If your tackles can't hold up, your season can unravel fast. This move is protection against that nightmare. And it might only be the beginning. Reports suggest Cleveland plans to keep adding to the offensive line, possibly through free agency and the draft. If that happens, this trade becomes the first domino in a larger overhaul. Think about it. One solid addition can change a unit. 2 or 3 can change a franchise. Because when your offensive line is stable, everything else becomes easier. Play calling opens up. Quarterbacks play faster. The run game becomes more efficient. Even the defense benefits from longer, sustained drives. The Browns aren't chasing headlines here. They're building insulation against chaos. And if this truly is the first step in a full offensive line rebuild, then what we're witnessing isn't just a trade. It's the early stages of a structural reset, one that could quietly shift the balance of power in Cleveland's favor. But there's still one major question looming over all of this, and it involves the quarterback room itself. Now we have to address the elephant in the room. Because no matter how strong the offensive line becomes, the Cleveland Browns' future still revolves around one position, quarterback. And right now, that room is complicated. Deshaun Watson is still technically part of the picture. His contract hasn't disappeared. The financial commitment is massive. But over the past few seasons, injuries, inconsistency, and off-field controversy have created uncertainty around his long-term role. Accusations surfaced in previous years that cast a long shadow, and while the organization stood by him publicly, the on-field results haven't matched the investment. That's just reality. So when the Browns trade for a top-tier pass protector and immediately lock him up through 2028, it forces a bigger question. Who exactly are they protecting? Because this doesn't feel like a short-term fix. It feels like preparation. Shedeur Sanders has been hovering around the franchise conversation like a storm on the horizon. Confident, polarizing, talented. Some analysts believe he could be the future face of the organization. Others think the hype needs to cool down. But what can't be denied is this. When teams believe they've found their young quarterback, they start building the wall in front of him early. And that's what this looks like. You don't invest $63 million in protection if you're unsure about the direction at quarterback. You do it when you're planning stability. You do it when you're mapping out the next 3 to 5 years. There's also a psychological layer here. Young quarterbacks develop differently when they trust their protection. If Sanders steps into a situation where he knows his right side is anchored by a proven veteran, it changes how he processes the field. He doesn't rush reads. He doesn't bail from clean pockets. He grows. And growth is what Cleveland desperately needs at that position. But let's be clear, nothing is officially decided. The Browns haven't announced a quarterback transition. There's been no dramatic press conference, no public declaration. Still, rumors suggest internal momentum is shifting. Reports claim the organization wants to lean younger. It's been said that the locker room energy feels different when conversations turn toward the future. Again, that's speculation, but speculation in the NFL usually starts somewhere. What we do know is this: front offices rarely make isolated moves. Trades like this connect to a bigger strategy. They ripple outward. If Sanders wins the job, he'll step behind a reinforced line. If Watson somehow reclaims the role, he benefits too. Either way, the Browns are insulating themselves against disaster. And that might be the smartest part of all. Because in a division loaded with elite defenses and relentless pass rushers, stability up front isn't optional, it's survival. The quarterback battle may dominate headlines soon. But the groundwork for that battle, it's already being laid in the trenches. Here's something that makes this move even more urgent: the division Cleveland plays in. The AFC North is not forgiving. It's not developmental. It's not patient. You're lining up against T.J. Watt multiple times a year. You're dealing with Baltimore's aggressive blitz schemes. Cincinnati can heat up the pocket fast when healthy. Every divisional game feels like a street fight in December weather. If your tackles can't survive in that environment, nothing else matters. That's the context that makes the Titus Howard trade feel less flashy and more necessary. This isn't about winning headlines in March. It's about surviving November. Over the past few seasons, Cleveland's offensive line hasn't consistently held up against elite edge rushers. And in this division, that's fatal. Drives stall, turnovers increase, quarterbacks take unnecessary hits, confidence erodes, seasons spiral. We've seen it. So when the Browns targeted a tackle who ranked among the league's best in pass block win rate, it wasn't random. It was specific. They needed someone who could handle premier pass rushers without constant tight end help. Someone who doesn't require a chip on every snap. Someone who lets the offense stay unpredictable. Howard fits that mold. And here, where it gets even more strategic. When your line can hold up in one-on-one situations, your playbook expands. You can send more receivers into routes. You can stretch the field vertically. You can keep defenses guessing instead of telegraphing protection schemes. That's how you compete with teams that already have established quarterback play. Because let's be honest, the Browns are trying to catch up. Baltimore has stability. Cincinnati has proven firepower. Pittsburgh always finds a way to stay physical and relevant. Cleveland doesn't just need improvement, they need structural strength. This move signals they understand that. But there's another layer that shouldn't be ignored. When a franchise begins investing heavily in the trenches, it usually means they believe their competitive window is approaching. Teams that think they're years away don't commit this kind of money to veteran protection. They stay cheap. They rebuild slowly. Cleveland didn't do that. They acted like a team that expects to matter soon. And that shift in mentality might be the biggest takeaway of all. Because talent alone doesn't change a franchise. Direction does. Intent does. Infrastructure does. The Browns aren't hopping for chaos in the division. They're preparing for it. And if this truly is the first domino in a broader offensive line overhaul, then the rest of the AFC North should be paying attention. Because Cleveland might not be rebuilding anymore. They might be reloading. Most fans focus on the headline number, $63 million, but the real story isn't just the contract, it's the timeline. 3 years through 2028. That's not a panic move, that's alignment. When front offices structure deals like this, they're syncing contracts with a broader competitive window. They're looking at when their young core will peak. They're forecasting cap growth. They're anticipating extensions. This isn't random spending, it's synchronized planning. And that's where things get interesting. If Shedeur Sanders, or any young quarterback, becomes the full-time starter soon, his rookie contract clock becomes one of the most valuable advantages in football. Quarterbacks on rookie deals allow teams to load up elsewhere. That's how contenders are built in today's NFL. Look around the league. The formula repeats itself. Solid quarterback on a manageable contract, heavy investment in protection, strategic veteran additions, drafted weapons growing together. Cleveland appears to be positioning itself inside that formula. Because here's the truth, once a quarterback gets paid top-tier money, roster flexibility tightens, windows shrink, mistakes become costly. So if the Browns believe their next franchise quarterback is on the roster or arriving soon, locking in premium protection before that payday makes perfect sense. It's preventative architecture. And there's another angle to consider. The salary cap is projected to keep rising. What feels expensive today may look reasonable 2 years from now. By 2027 or 2028, a $21 million average for a high-level tackle might not even crack the top tier at the position. In other words, Cleveland may have secured long-term stability at a price that ages well. That's the kind of move smart organizations make quietly, then benefit from loudly later. But here's the part most people won't realize until much later. Culture shifts start in the trenches. When you prioritize protection, you're sending a message about identity. Physical, accountable, structured. It changes how the locker room feels. Linemen take pride in it. Quarterbacks feel supported. Coaches call games differently. It builds belief. And belief has been something Browns fans have struggled with for years. Now, none of this guarantees success. Let's be clear. There are still holes on the roster. The quarterback situation still needs clarity. The AFC North is still brutal. But sustainable teams aren't built overnight. They're built with layered decisions that stack on top of each other. This feels like one of the foundational layers. A trade that didn't explode social media. A contract that didn't dominate national debate. But 5 years from now, this could be the move people circle back to. The moment Cleveland stopped reacting and started constructing something intentional. And if that's true, then what comes next might be even more revealing. In the middle of all the contract numbers, roster breakdowns, and quarterback speculation, something else happened that put everything into perspective. Dominic Ponder, a former Colorado teammate of Shedeur Sanders, tragically lost his life in a car accident. He was young, full of potential, a locker room brother to many of the same players now chasing NFL dreams. And just like that, he was gone. Moments like that hit differently. They cut through the noise of trades and depth charts. They remind everyone, players, fans, executives, that football is what they do, not who they are. Shedeur Sanders shared his emotions publicly. Teammates across the football community responded. The Colorado program felt it deeply. When you share practices, bus rides, late-night film sessions, and dreams of making it big, those bonds don't fade just because jerseys change. They stay. And here, why that matters in this conversation. When young quarterbacks step into the NFL, they don't just carry playbooks. They carry life experiences. Loss, pressure, expectations, grief, motivation, all of it travels with them. If Sanders becomes the future in Cleveland, he won't just be playing for contracts or headlines. He'll be playing with perspective. And sometimes that perspective sharpens focus in ways stats never capture. Organizations talk constantly about building culture, about supporting players beyond the field, about creating stability. But moments like this test whether those words mean anything. If Cleveland truly is building around a young quarterback, protecting him physically with players like Titus Howard is only part of the equation. Supporting him emotionally, creating a locker room grounded in accountability and brotherhood matters just as much. And there's something powerful about timing. In the same stretch where Cleveland is reinforcing its offensive line and signaling long-term belief in the future, Sanders is being reminded how fragile that future can be, how quickly everything can change. That kind of perspective often fuels players differently. It shifts priorities, it strengthens leadership, it deepens maturity. Now, it would be unfair to draw dramatic conclusions from tragedy. Football and life are separate lanes, but the emotional weight players carry always finds its way onto the field in some form. And if Cleveland is serious about constructing something sustainable, it has to extend beyond contracts and draft picks. It has to be about building an environment where young stars can grow, as players and as people. Because championships require talent, but sustained success requires something deeper. And sometimes, the most important foundations aren't visible in the box score at all. Which brings us to the final question. Are the Browns finally building something real? Or is this just another promising chapter that fades too soon? So here we are. A fifth-round pick turned into a top-tier right tackle. A 3-year, $63 million commitment. A clear investment in protection. a possible signal toward a new era at quarterback. On paper, it all makes sense. But Browns fans have seen promising blueprints before. They've heard confident press conferences. They've watched offseason wins turn into December collapses. They've felt the emotional swing from hope to frustration more times than they'd like to admit. That's why this moment feels different, but also delicate. Because what separates real change from temporary optimism is follow-through. If Titus Howard is the first domino, the next moves matter even more. Does Cleveland continue reinforcing the line? Do they add explosive weapons in the draft? Do they create clarity at quarterback instead of letting uncertainty linger? Those answers will define whether this trade becomes a footnote or a foundation. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Investing in protection only pays off if the quarterback situation stabilizes. If the Browns mismanage that transition, whether it's Watson, Sanders, or someone else entirely, the line can only mask so much. But if they get it right, everything accelerates. A protected quarterback plays faster. An offense with rhythm controls tempo. A team that wins in the trenches travels well in cold weather playoff games. That's not hype, that's postseason reality. And Cleveland hasn't consistently built for postseason reality. Until now, maybe. What stands out most about this move isn't flash. It's discipline. It's patience. It's a front office resisting the urge to chase headlines and instead reinforcing structure. That's how contenders operate quietly before they operate loudly. There's still risk. There's always risk. Howard has to stay healthy. The cap has to stay manageable. The quarterback plan has to crystallize. The AFC North isn't getting easier. But for the first time in a while, this feels like a move rooted in long-term thinking rather than short-term pressure. And that's why this could be bigger than it looks. 5 years from now, fans might look back and say this was the offseason where Cleveland stopped scrambling and started constructing. Or it could become another what if in a long list of almosts. That's the tension. But one thing is undeniable, the Browns didn't sit still. They didn't hesitate, they acted. And in a division where hesitation gets you buried, action matters. The real verdict won't come today. It'll come on cold Sundays in December. When the pocket holds firm, the quarterback stands tall, and Cleveland finally looks like a team built to last. And that's what makes this moment so important. Not the dollar amount, not the headlines, not even the debate about who lines up under center. It's the direction. For once, the Browns aren't reacting to failure, they're preparing for success. They're reinforcing the trenches before the storm hits. They're thinking about 2026, 2027, and beyond instead of just surviving the next season. Titus Howard might not sell jerseys like a star quarterback. He won't dominate fantasy football conversations. But if this works, he'll be one of the quiet reasons everything else does. Now it comes down to execution. Will this be the move that anchored a new era in Cleveland? Or just another promising step that never fully materialized? That answer is coming soon. But one thing is clear. The Browns just made it known they're done waiting. And the rest of the AFC North should probably take that seriously.